otherwise make it.
Yeah, if you really wanted to tick people off, you can just build all sorts of stuff. Yep. All right. So I want you guys to go into your Bind 9 install and use Etsy. All right, because Bind 9 is awesome. All right. What we need to do now is we need to make our own local records, right? So if we do sudo nano db.local. All right, your db.local file is everything that you've got that's local to your DNS tree. All right? So you have @ name service for localhost, right? So it will look at localhost first to try to figure all this stuff out. Then you have an alias record for 127.0.0.1. Then you have a AAA record for the IPv6 version of it. So if you go down to the last line and you want to say mail in a 192.168 and darn it, typing number lock 192.168.203.45 if that's your mail server, right? So if that's going to be the IP address for your mail server, then there you go. Use the range that I gave you for your rack number. All right. If you want to do Samba in a 192.168.203.46, all right, you can start building out what your network's going to look like in DNS. Yes, sir. Okay, A is an alias record like we talked about on Monday. And basically what it is you're giving an alias to an IP address. So if I just want to cut down on how much typing I have to do, so if I just want to go to mail, I should be able to just type in mail and it will automatically go to that IP address. So it's an alias. Mail equates to the alias of that IP address. All right? So that's what I'm using up here as your example. You need to use the numbering convention that I gave you at the beginning of the class. So, yes, ma'am.
With all these different IP addresses that we're attaching to everything, we're running out of numbers in our area.
For right now, you will, but when we actually build out the network, you won't.
So what do we do about it now?
Nothing. Just pick a couple IP addresses. So does this make sense? So basically what you're saying is you're giving it a short name. Instead of having to type in that whole, oh my God, rack 7, CIS 215, CIS 216, highline.edu, you can just make a shortcut for these. And that's essentially what you're doing. Yes, sir.
So each particular organization should have its own mail server?
Not right now. Right now, let's just stick to what our main network is going to look like. Right? The one you're going to be building at the end of term. Right? So for right now, we're just learning how to install DNS, and I'm trying to explain how to go from that long name to a shorthand name by using the alias record. But you guys are going to get together and you're going to start designing your Linux network here in a little bit, right? And you need to know this. Because the first thing I'm going to do is sit down and go, what's the name of your box? And you're going to tell me it's Samba, and I'm going to go ping Samba. And it has to be able to translate that, right? So all your systems have to be pingable. And they also have to be, if I decide to go out on a web browser and go straight to your mail server, I should be able to get to it just by typing in mail. All right? It's in the db.local file. That's everything this computer knows about for its zone, for its particular start of authority. Okay? Make sense? Maybe kind of, sort of? All right. So all you're doing is basically saying this IP address equates to this name. That's all you're doing. It's a shortcut. So alias records are actually really kind of cool. Now if you wanted to be kind of interesting, mail dot all right. You can also use the full name, right? Because sometimes someone's going to come in from the outside and they need to be able to find out where everything actually is. Right? So you can also do an alias name pointing to the IP address for that. So you can use shortcuts, you can use long ways. As long as there's a record in there that points to that name pointing to an IP address, then you're pretty much so good to go. You can look things up.
That's another way of doing it.
That's just another way of doing it. Right? So if someone was coming from outside and they needed to find the mail server, right, they could do an alias record. Now, if we really want to point it off and Bing an email server, mail in MX, because it's a mail server, right? So you have to make an MX record, a mail exchange record for mail. And then you can do the same thing for the long one. So remember, what's an MX record? Mail exchange record. So everybody will know that this thing talks on port 45 or port 25, and it's good to go. So whenever you're making your mail exchange records, it's basically the same thing. Now, can I be evil? Can I do something like mail to in a Cname as mail? All right, I can make aliases of aliases, and that's what I use Cname for, right? So if I want to make a different name for it, if I want to offset some people to mail to, because I want to track and see what's going on, I only have one mail server, but I want one building to be mail 2, I want one building to be mail, I want another building to be mail 3, right? I can make a Cname record. So I know that if you're in building 29, you know what mail 2 is, that then points back to mail, which then points back to an IP address. All right? So I can make some kind of interesting aliases along the way. So an alias is the name and the IP address. An A record is the name and the IP address. Right? A mail exchange, an MX record, basically is either the shortcut name or the full name for handling email. That way the network knows how to route all this stuff. Because it's going to go, okay, mail just goes here. Just keeps on going here. I don't want to have to deal with it. I don't want to have to process it. Because there are special things that happen in SMTP. So mail exchange records are usually basically, here you go. I'm just going to offload everything onto you and cut my DNS down a little bit. And then I can make aliases of aliases. So by using Cname. So if I want some people to use mail 2 as a name, right, because I want to segregate who's got what by building, just to see who's doing what, mail 2 will then go back to mail, which then will go back to the A record 192.168.203.45. Basically a redirect.
That email is going somewhere.
That email is going to go somewhere, and it's going to end up at an IP address. All right, when you use Cnames, that has to process it twice. It reads mail 2, goes mail, all right, looks up mail, mail belongs to this IP address. All right, now if you make a bad loop in here, if you do something where it doesn't quite work, where we do mail 3 in a mail, yeah, that won't work too well. All right. Well, what it does is it causes a redirect, but it doesn't know what to do with it because it's not followed by an IP address. So if you have multiple mail servers, yeah, what you can do is put a semicolon in here, comment. One. All right. So you can actually comment these things out too, so we know when that entry was actually made. Right? Right? And then you can do stuff that says testing new email server and all the rest of it. So you can actually do a specific record back as long as it points to a specific thing, and then comment that entry so that you can actually go back and see, okay, if this is a test email server, then I'm not going to want the long name, right? Because I don't want anyone from the outside getting into it. I just want, because if you go on the internet and you type mail3, you'll end up with a Lord knows what, right? But if I'm internal to the network, then I know that mail3 actually belongs to this IP address and that this is a new testing email server. You can also put in there rolled into production on this day, right? Yes, sir. Yes, semicolon is for comments. All right. You can also do, see, so the semicolon is for comments. Usually you'll see a comment at the top of the file to kind of set, here's some white space because we want to make sure humans can actually read it. All right. But yeah, no, they usually use semicolons for comments and white space when you're actually dealing with files inside the Linux operating system. You'll also see 2 slashes. In PHP, you'll see 2 slashes and Shift 8, the little sparkly sunny thing, right? Whatever they call it. So there's all sorts of ways of doing this, right? But what we're going to focus on in here, right, are basically Cnames, A records, and MX records, because those are really the services you're going to do. There's about a dozen other kinds of records, but they're really actually kind of rare to go through, right? So kind of makes sense? You guys kind of sort of with me? Are you guys thinking I'm recording this today? Lots of blank spaces? All right. Then when you're done, you go ahead and you save it. Did anybody make a backup of their original file? All right, so we know that we've got everything in here. All right, now the other thing I want to do is what we need to do. Sometimes when we don't know what we've got, we need to make something called a forward zone. So what we want to do is we want to go into sudo nano name.conf.options, right? And you're going to see something in here called a forwarder. All right. Forwarders are the upstream DNS server for things we don't know about. So if it's not in the db.local, I don't know about it, right? What I need to do is I need to forward it to our next upstream, and everybody knows who our upstream IP address by DNS people are, right? The Quest, right? So what we need to do is we just need to go down to forwarders, because we definitely do not want it to be quad zip. So our forwarder for stuff we don't know about is going to be 205.5.171.3 or 3.65. .2.65, right, with the semicolon. And then we need to pull all the comments out. All right, so it should look like this for your forwarder. Right? So it should be forwarders, curly bracket, our Quest DNS, and then curly bracket and semicolons. And I made sure that I did semicolons today. All right? So that's what your forwarder should look like. And a forwarder, again, is if you're looking up dan.com and I know who dan.com is, who is my next upstream provider? Who's the next person that can tell me who dan.com is? Right? And that's really kind of where you want to go with this. Does that make sense? All right, you always got to tell it who its next one in the trusted tree that you're going to use is. So there's stuff I know about, and that's my db.local, right? There's the boxes I've got, my mail server, my Samba server, my other boxes, and all the rest of it for the services I'm providing from my domain as the primary master, rack4.cis217.highline.edu. But because my box doesn't know about google.com or bing.com or yahoo.com or ubuntu.com. I need to forward those to somebody else to kind of get an answer for those. Now what will end up happening is it will temporarily store those for like about 7 days, 7 hours, right? That's where all those timeouts come in. So if someone else comes along after you and looks up bing.com, then it's already there in cache. It's cached on the local server for that timeout period that you specified earlier in your configuration file. So make sense? You have to edit out the wax. You have to go ahead and be the girl in the 1890s with the hatchet. Take out the wax. All right, that was a really, really bad geeky joke, and I apologize for that. All right, so that's DNS in a nutshell. So what you've done is you set up your primary zone master for your racks. For the love of God, make sure that it's for your racks and your racks only. Right? No dan.com, no example.com, or anything else. Right? You've identified what your boxes are going to look like for when you actually do the build out. Right? So you've got some IP addresses there. And then we built a forwarder. Right? And that's it. That's all there is to doing this configuration for this specific thing that we're doing. Right? So what's an MX record? All right. What's an A record? And then an alias record is put together how? Name in a IP address. Because if you get them backwards, then everything else looks kind of funny. All right. What's a Cname record? It basically allows you to have more than one name for a computer. All right. So if you have one Samba computers, but you want to have people come in via different ways to use different names, and sometimes that makes sense, especially if you're load balancing, right? Especially if you're load balancing huge networks, right? Then you're going to want to make sure that you have an alias called Cname for different naming conventions across the board. You can comment stuff out. I really recommend commenting things as you kind of go through this. Right, especially the date of change, right? Because things will change on your network as you're kind of building it out. Put if you do it this way, after your IP address, you want to put the semicolon for your comments. Because remember, we're actually down in Linux. We're actually in the operating system when we're doing this. So the semicolon is what's going to tell you it's a comment. To ignore everything after that. It's sort of like a carriage return. Just ignore everything after the semicolon. Don't look behind the curtain. It's all smoke and mirrors out here. You'll notice I watch way too much Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi, wash on, wash off. Okay. All right. So are there any questions about this at all?
Now, can we take and do that exact same thing on ours?
You can do this exact same thing on yours. All right. Well, hopefully your machines won't blow up. That's why I recommend backups. I really recommend backing up all your configuration files. I cannot stress how important backing up your configuration files is. All right. There's just no way I can stress it. The only way you guys are going to know is that in 5 years from now, you're going to blow up a box and you're going to have no configuration files backed up or anything else. And then you're going to go, damn it, that's what he meant. All right? Seriously. This is something that the only way I've ever seen anybody learn this is the hard way. All right? I can tell you this all you want, but I know how much you'll listen to me. All right, so any questions? Any questions at all on this? I will leave this up for right now. So you will be building a Samba box. You will be building an LDAP box. You'll need DNS and you'll need email. Right? So you're going to want to have a primary DNS. You'll want to have a primary master for your ns.rack5.cis217.highline.edu. So one of you guys is going to build the primary master for that. It doesn't mean that someone else can't build out a secondary. So instead of the words primary master, just put in the word secondary. So you have a failover DNS system, right, in that file.
Now, how do you direct it that way? Using the semicolon comment?
No, instead of we're using the words primary master when you're building out that zone, Just put in the word secondary, and then you automatically have a failover DNS. Those two will be talking to each other all day long.
So you don't need primary, you can use secondary.
You need to have a primary master. If you want to have a failover DNS, you'll put, instead of primary master, you'll use the word secondary.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. You don't need to put your primary master is your primary master.
Yes.
And then when you have a secondary, you write secondary.
Yes, your primary master is the DNS server for your little rack.
Okay.
And then if you want to have a secondary, it's always a good idea to have something fail over, right? Because when you're clustering services and you only have one single point of failure, it's generally a bad thing, right? Especially when you're doing an operational process like DNS, it's always good to have a secondary system that can handle any overloads that you may have, right? So it's always a good idea to have a secondary. So what we're building then, and what you guys need to do as a rack, right, is you know you're going to be building certain things. So let's write out what those things are going to be. Go ahead and just write these things down. All right, we want a new blank document. Anybody seen? God, really? No. No, there will be no logging in. All right, so you know that you're going to have a DNS primary. You should have a DNS secondary. All right, you know you're going to have an LDAP server. You know you're going to have a database. You know you're going to have a web server, right? You go through the class, you'll see what we'll be building here. You know that you are going to have a Samba server. All right, so these are the big things you're going to be building. So when you're doing your design documents, you can put in 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, and 50, right? So this is going to be your master for when you start building this thing out in week 8, so that you know what you've got up and coming, right? And then just go ahead and dump it into a team box. If you want to have a team folder on Canvas, I can build you one, I think. All right, I haven't done that yet, so give me a couple minutes to figure that out. But other than that, as long as you've got this whole thing where you've got it kind of pre-planned, where you know what you're building and you want to specifically IP address it, then doing documentation is probably the second most critical thing you'll do, right? Your network design diagram is going to be first, but your documentation of what you're building and why you're building it is going to be the second most important thing you'll do. Actually, physically building it is like 4th or 5th most important thing, right? So it's going to be network design, why, what, who, when, where, what, why, and how documentation, budget, cost, who's got it, who's going to pay for this, and then user buy-in. Always make sure your users are cool with this, right? Especially if you're going to roll out a new system on them. So if they're moving from one system to another system, so if they're moving from something to Samba, you have to convince the user that this is actually a better idea than what they've currently got in place. And change management is a pain. All right, it is a pain in the tuchus, the gluteal maximus. All right, but go ahead and start keeping the design document going. So right now, I know it's only week 2, but this will really help you understand what's going on when you actually start designing your network. Right. So just take notes or however you want to do it, right? Whatever makes it more comfortable for you guys. So any questions? You can use Visio, you can use PowerPoint, you can use the little drawing program that comes in Windows. If you need Visio, you've all got access to DreamSpark, so you can download Visio. Right? And you can use that if you want. Visio is always good because you can do really nice, beautiful professional drawings in Visio. Have you guys ever done a network engineering design drawing yet? So you know what to do, how to label computer systems right, how to do all the rest of that? Okay, I don't want shotgunning. I want you guys to kind of do this right. So when you're designing your box, right, you technically want to say operating system, Windows, Linux, whatever it is, IP address, service, what service it runs, right? So we know what service is running. And then anything that's an additional note about the box, right? So a good network design for every single computer you put on that network design, whether it's a router, switch, hub, computer, server, user box, whatever, you really want to be able to say what's on it. Right? So that we have basically a standard, so we know what's going on with the entire process. Right? This is for everything that's on the network. Right? And this is one way too if you baseline it out. So if Dan joins your network for a couple of days, and all of a sudden you find PuTTY and CC proxy and a bunch of other stuff on your box that's not authorized as software installed, and you can also remotely manage that box to make sure that I can't install stuff, then we basically know what our licensing, what software we've got going. You can poke all this stuff into a database because it's a table, right? If you do this as an Excel spreadsheet, you can move it over to a database and start using that as a basis for having an inventory sheet for your network, which is really kind of handy. Then you can search for it and do all sorts of other cool things, right? Make sense? So when you guys are designing your document, this is something I'm going to be really looking for. Right? I'm going to want to know as much as I can about what you're building and why you're building it. It is never too early to get used to doing good network documentation. I would have started you all when you were 2, but I didn't get to you early enough. I'm sure. All right, so any other questions? Are we good? Okay. So you guys have got enough time to go ahead and tighten up what you've got done with DNS. So go ahead and make your forward. Go ahead and make your db.local. Go ahead and make sure your install is clean. Go ahead and commit all your changes, and you guys should have your DNS up and running. And you should be able to do an NS lookup, right? Set your server to your local box. Everybody remember the NS lookup commands from 215 and 150? All right. So set your server, NS lookup, server name, and then start looking things up so it will bounce through your server. And just go to town on it and have fun. Verify that it works. And that's it. That's all we got. Any questions? All right. Have at it, people.